dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yup, what's good, original crew? We back on the channel with more Mr. Ballen. We got the horrifying true story of Katy Perry's ex. Now, I've been wanting to do this one for about 6 to 8 months now.
It has not been that long.
It has.
Has it?
Since we were throwing Mr. Ballen out, yes.
Well,
she has not.
I mean, because you give me the options, and I'm like,
she has not wanted to. She has not wanted to do this one because she says she doesn't know what he's gonna be talking about. And she doesn't want to be. I'm like, hey,
I don't know what
it's a possibility she don't even really come up. A lot of times it's just a clickbait title.
I mean, possibly. I'm just like, dang, where are we going? You know what I'm saying?
But all I know is somebody she possibly dated. That might be true, but it possibly has nothing to do with her. Mm-hmm. Even the one about remember the child star joint? The child star, he ended up stealing the money from the old people, killing them on the boat. And then he was...
Yeah.
She don't. All right, so with that being said, before we get into it, make sure you check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go if you want the first part. All you have to do is check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's video,
like it with a thumbs up.
Let's go ahead and get into it. Let's check it out. Let's see what this one's about, y'all. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Today's story is about a famous Hollywood actor who did something truly horrific. And surprisingly, not that many people know about it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button their favorite food, a burrito, but separate the meat, cheese, rice, and sour cream into 4 distinct sections before rolling it up. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. Before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to Billy Jensen, who is a fantastic true crime investigative journalist who wrote the article for the LA magazine called The Secret Life of Johnny Lewis. That article was used extensively in the making of today's video. So thank you, Billy. Johnny Lewis was only 7 years old when he landed his first acting role. Granted, it was only a bit part in an obscure escalator safety video, but it was a start. From there, Johnny appeared in dozens of commercials, including with Pizza Hut, before someone recognized this kid has real talent, and he earned appearances on the hit TV shows Seventh Heaven, Malcolm in the Middle, and Drake and Josh, which were really big in the late 90s and early 2000s. In 2001, when Johnny was 18 years old, he had made enough money from acting that he was able to leave his parents' home in North Los Angeles and move into a new home right in Hollywood with a bunch of other up-and-coming actors and actresses. By 2006, when Johnny was 23 years old, he was riding high. He had landed several more big TV roles, like a recurring role in the show The OC, which was very popular in the 2000s, and in 2006, he was dating the mega pop star Katy Perry. And although their romance was relatively short, apparently it was very intense because Katy would go on to write 2 songs that were apparently about Johnny. But Johnny's real rise to stardom occurred 2 years later in 2008 when he was cast as the character Half Sack on the critically acclaimed motorcycle drama Sons of Anarchy. While the show made him famous and fabulously wealthy, Johnny was growing concerned with the direction the show was taking. He felt like it was becoming too violent. Johnny liked reading poetry and studying philosophy and staying up late drinking tea and playing chess. He did not like acting out scenes of gratuitous violence. It just wasn't who he was. So after being on the show for 2 seasons very successfully, he was a very popular character. He went to the writers and said, "You got to write me out of the script. I can't do this anymore."
Do you remember him at all?
When he showed that picture with with
back
the little
in
red scarf. I remember that picture, and I do remember his face because some of the shows he mentioned, of course, you know, I watched them.
Yeah.
But I just didn't put two and two together.
Yeah.
You know.
Like Seven Heaven, I never watched, but Malcolm in the Middle, I watched a lot.
I used to love Seventh Heaven.
And Drake and Josh, I'm sure everybody our age group watched Drake and Josh. And Malcolm in the Middle, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What Malcolm in the Middle?
I was, Malcolm, yeah.
But unfortunately, I haven't watched Sons of Anarchy, so I do not remember his character.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't watched it either.
Very popular character, he went to the writers and said, "You got to write me out of the script. I can't do this anymore." The writers were totally caught off guard and begged him to stay, but he had made up his mind, and so in 2009, his character was killed off. After leaving Sons of Anarchy, Johnny decided that he wasn't going to pursue any serious acting roles for the time being. Instead, he wanted to focus his time on writing his first novel, which was about this musical genius trying to make his way in the world. And so he started asking around to see if anybody he knew of a quiet place he could live and write out of. And his photographer said, "I think I know the place." It was called the Writer's Villa, and it was this beautiful house with 6 bedrooms for rent right outside of Hollywood. Over the years, it had become a sort of safe haven for up-and-coming actors and actresses still looking to land their big break. The reason it developed this reputation was because of the owner, Katy Davis. She was this wonderful woman who really understood how difficult trying to break into Hollywood was for all these people that stayed at her house. And so she would look after them and make them food and offer them rides, and she would stay up late and listen to their frustrations and be a shoulder to cry on if they didn't get the part they wanted. Many of her tenants, who went on to be big Hollywood stars, would later attribute their success, at least in part, to the time they spent with Katy at the villa, which they remembered as being therapeutic and soothing. Even though Johnny had already had his big break in the Sons of Anarchy, he loved the idea of living in such a peaceful place that seemed to cater to eccentric artists like himself. So in April of 2009, Johnny called Katy and requested a room, and she said, "Absolutely, you can stay on the second floor in the red suite." After moving in, Johnny would tell his friends that the writer's villa was just as amazing as he thought it was going to be. And Katy specifically was just as wonderful as everyone said she was. He actually struck up a friendship with her almost immediately. Everything seemed to be going really well for Johnny in his life until a few months later, he found out his girlfriend, Diane, was pregnant. Although this totally screwed up his plans for his novel, Johnny was really excited about being a father, and so he decided to move out of the villa and in with Diane, who lived nearby, to help take care of their child. 9 months later, on April 6th, 2010, Diane gave birth to a healthy little girl named Culla May, and Johnny and Diane fell madly in love with her. But unfortunately, Johnny and Diane's love for each other faded quickly after becoming parents, and before long, Johnny had moved out and back in with his parents. Not long after that, Johnny and Diane became embroiled in this really vicious, long custody battle over Culla May, which ultimately Johnny lost, which was devastating for him. A few months later, in October of 2011, when Johnny was still living with his parents, he decided to take his motorcycle out and just go ride around and clear his head. And so he drove for about 2 hours to the west of LA out into the desert, where he lost control of his bike and he crashed. After getting to the hospital, his injuries were determined to be relatively minor, except they were concerned he might have a head injury. However, after testing negative for a concussion, he was said to be okay by doctors and he was sent home. But when he got home from the hospital, he was not okay. He was a totally different person. Johnny's father, Michael, immediately noticed the change in his son's behavior. He just started acting really weird and erratic, and his thoughts weren't always coherent, and he was really agitated all the time. It was just very obvious that something was off. And it made Michael wonder, perhaps my son did get a head injury from that motorcycle accident, and the doctors just missed it. And so Michael scheduled 2 separate MRIs for Johnny to go to, but for whatever reason, Johnny refused to go. Around this time, Johnny's friends began to know.
You feel like the head possibility to crash changed like personality, his personality. Like anytime like head trauma is very, very like important to monitor. Reason why: personality can change, lifestyle change, or possibly the worst of death. So anytime there's like trauma to the brain, you might feel okay now,
right?
But let's say 2-3 years from now, something clicks, and you don't realize that slight bump to the head is what triggered that 3 years from now. You know what I'm saying? Like, even with my mom and her situation, she at one point believes it's because when she slipped and fell outside, she hit her head. Now she's dealing with what she deals with, which is now, unfortunately, it's a whole lifestyle change, medical change to her. But I think it happened 6-8 months prior, and we thinking she had a stroke. Not knowing when she started trying to remember things, she like, they asking her, hey, have you bumped your head recently? She was like, well, I do remember one time, like, I had a severe headache, but I was okay. I just saw stars for a little while. But it possibly, that one triggering effect can affect, so, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you never, like, anytime it's a possibility of head trauma, you gotta take that 100% serious. Because you never know what might come from it.
But for whatever reason, Johnny refused to go. Around this time, Johnny's friends began to notice his strange behavior when in December of that year, he was at an acting class and he began speaking in a vaguely British accent. And everybody in the class noticed it, and eventually someone said, hey, why are you doing that? And Johnny was like, what? And just kind of shrugged it off and acted like he wasn't doing that. A few weeks later, on the morning of January 3rd, 2012, Johnny was at his parents' house and he was sitting in the kitchen while his mom was making omelets, and Johnny just kind of abruptly says, I'm going to go out for a walk. So he gets up, he's only got his pajamas on, no shoes on. He walks out the door, and as he's walking down the road, he gets maybe 10 or 15 feet away from his parents' house when he hears someone screaming, like they're screaming in distress. And he thinks it's coming from the apartment that was right next to his parents' house. And so he breaks into the apartment, but there's no one in the apartment. It's totally vacant. And so as he's in this apartment, wondering what's going on, the two men that owned the apartment, they came home and they see Johnny standing there, and they told him he had to leave immediately. And instead of leaving immediately, Johnny grabbed a nearby glass bottle and he charged at them and hit them both over the head with the bottle before they managed to restrain him and hold him down until the police showed up. Johnny claimed he was acting in self-defense, but the police didn't believe him, and so they charged him with trespassing, burglary, and assault with a deadly weapon, and they sent him to jail. When Johnny's father was finally able to come to the jail and bail his son out, it had been 8 days, and in those 8 days, Johnny had been moved from general population to a psych ward because he was banging his head against the inside of his cell, and at one point he had tried to jump off of a balcony, and he was just generally acting unhinged. And so when he was discharged, on his paperwork, a doctor at the jail had commented that he thought Johnny at one point must have had some sort of head injury that had made him act this way, and he was definitely suicidal. When Johnny got back to his parents' house, he was an absolute wreck. Physically, he had 2 black eyes and his face was all puffed up from the confrontation he had with those 2 men in the apartment. And emotionally, he was so distraught that he wouldn't let anyone in his family come near him. He just holed up in his room and just told everyone to stay away. He also became extremely sensitive to light, to the point where he was turning off all the lights in his parents' home. And then when they would eventually just turn them back on again, he would get agitated and turn them all off. And then finally, he just disabled his parents' fuse box. But despite Johnny's obvious issues after coming home from jail, over the next few weeks, he did actually seem to be improving, to the point where at the end of January, so about a month after he came home from jail, his parents allowed him to move out and go live on his own in Santa Monica, California, about 30 minutes away. But as soon...
Wrong mistake. Like, he experienced a motorcycle crash. Did nobody ever correlate that to the doctor that was in the prison, or the jail? Like, did not like possibly mention it, or did nobody view the report that the doctor said? Yeah, they just like, oh, here's his files. Like, all right, just paperwork. You know what I'm saying? Like, 9 times out of 10, no one relate that information like verbally to or bring it to anyone's attention. Yeah, but that sucks, because obviously if you found out, you know what I'm saying, you'll start putting 2 and 2 together. And I don't think anyone like really peeped how serious everything is going. Right. And then for him to switch to a British accent,
that's strange.
Him to move out and go live on his own in Santa Monica, California, about 30 minutes away. But as soon as he was living on his own, his troubles started again. On February 10th, so about a week after moving into this place in Santa Monica, he was arrested for punching some random stranger in the head outside of a yogurt shop, but he was ultimately released on $20,000 bail. A couple of days later, Johnny, fully clothed, just walked into the ocean, and when he was pulled out, he had to be brought to the hospital to be treated for hypothermia. A couple of days after getting out of the hospital, he was arrested again, this time for trying to break into a woman's apartment in Santa Monica. He claimed he thought it was his friend's apartment, but nobody believed him, so he was brought to jail and then released on bail again. After this second arrest in Santa Monica, Johnny's parents finally convinced him to go see a doctor about this potential head injury they thought he got from that 2011 motorcycle crash. Even though that jailhouse doc had suggested Johnny had a head injury, he had not officially diagnosed him. So Johnny needed another doctor to officially diagnose his head injury so they could begin to treat it. But the doctor Johnny wound up seeing did not suspect a head injury. Instead, he suspected schizophrenia or bipolar, which are two very serious mental disorders. And so he prescribed some medication to Johnny that would treat both of those disorders, and Johnny...
Can you possibly suffer from a head injury and develop those, those disorders?
I mean, I guess possibly. I mean, because I guess from the head injury it can alter like something in one of your lobes or something. But at the same time, it's still like he just started, like nothing else happened but but the accident. So that alone triggered something. So let's look at that. Like, let's look at that situation at hand. You know what I'm saying?
Let's look at
instead
the
of just throwing,
like
let's actually diagnose him. Okay, yes, he has a head injury. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is causing this instead of just throwing him drugs.
Yeah, and I sometimes I attribute that to like the laziness of science. You know what I'm saying? And not science itself, but those who are acting upon with science instead of properly listening to everything. Some people, as soon as you start talking to them, the first thing they're looking for is a resolution instead of taking in everything that has possibly occurred and start thoroughly themselves taking in the information. As soon as they say something to you, you were like, all right, let's find the reason why. Let's find the real cause instead of, all right, are y'all really listening to every last detail?
Right. And sorry.
No, go.
I'm about to say, sometimes it takes going to 10 different doctors, if that's what you want to do, to actually get down to the root cause of whatever the issue is. Because you do have some doctors, they'll sit there, write all day, hey, we're going to prescribe you this. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, did you hear any damn thing I said?
Because if you notice, his personality never was like that before. He might have some issues in relationships who don't.
Yeah.
Or he might have showed like some people in the acting world, they just don't want to do certain characters. They're just them. They're like, hey, I didn't sign up for this. I don't want to go in that direction. Cool. I'd rather be nothing than be a part of that, Yeah. And during this time period, has he even tried to get back into the acting? That's his career.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Has he tried to say, hey, let me retry this out, or hey, like, let me try to audition for this or this, or slowly get back to himself? Or has he just always showed signs of being different than what he was previously before?
Yeah, so...
disorders. And so he prescribed some medication to Johnny that would treat both of those disorders, and Johnny was on his way. Johnny refused to take the medication and refused to go see another doctor, and so his condition just continued to get worse. Johnny was still facing serious jail time for the break-in and assault against those two men in the apartment next to his parents' home, and so Johnny's lawyer was trying to get a deal done where Johnny would go to a mental health treatment facility for a year instead of going to jail for a year. But Johnny was so confident these charges would just get dropped and he'd be allowed to go back to his life and live the way he wanted to, that he fired his lawyer and he represented himself in court. But the charges were not dropped and he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. However, the jail he was sent to was so overcrowded, they reduced his sentence all the way down to only 6 weeks. When Johnny's father finally came to pick him up from prison on Friday, September 21st, 2012, Johnny was at an all-time low. Even though he had only been in jail for 6 weeks instead of the year he was supposed to be there, it was clear that amount of time had done an enormous amount of damage to him. And so on the car ride home from prison, Johnny just kind of sheepishly asked his father, hey Dad, would it be possible if you called Kathy Davis at the writer's villa and just see if there's any way I can move back in? And Michael's thinking to himself, I hadn't thought of that, but the writer's villa was the last place Johnny was when his life was still in order. It was probably the last place he was happy. And so he probably has attached a lot of fond memories to that place. And so that's a great place for him to go. And so as soon as they got home, Michael called Kathy Davis and explained the situation and said, is there any way he can stay there? And she said, absolutely. The red suite is still available. I'll go up and make the bed right now. I can't wait to see him. Johnny stayed with his parents that weekend. And then on Monday, September 24th, he packed up his stuff and he moved back into the villa. 2 days later, a 70-year-old man named Dan Blackburn, who was actually neighbors to the writer's villa property, he was looking out his front window at this man who was standing out in the road. He only had on jeans and red shoes. He had no shirt on and he was very sweaty. And he was just kind of frantically pacing around the road. And he had never seen this guy before. And so he's just kind of poking out behind his curtain, watching him to see what he's going to do next. And after about 15 minutes of this kind of strange pacing in the road, this guy turns and walks directly towards Dan's property, goes right up to the front step and starts knocking on the door. Dan was definitely a little bit concerned, but he shut the curtain, he walked over to the door, and he looks out the people, and there's this guy standing there with bright blue eyes that are all wide, and he's looking at the people as if he can see through and see Dan, but he can't. And so Dan reaches down and he opens the door just a little bit and he looks out.
Never. Why the fuck would you open the door? See, come on now. Why, if you see somebody who's acting strange outside, and then all of a sudden they turn and start knocking on the door, 9 times out of 10, they possibly saw you peeping out. And then for them to come and run up and knock on the door, 2 weeks later after he's been there, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm not opening the door.
Never would I have ever.
I don't open the door for nobody.
she don't.
I would not open the door.
One of y'all could come knock on the door, be like, "Hey, you kidding?" She'll be like, "Hey, off, bitch!
I just don't.
I'll come to the door before she will."
Yeah, I'm not coming. No, sorry.
Can see Dan, but he can't. And so Dan reaches down and he opens the door just a little bit and he looks out, and the guy outside looks at him and goes, "Hi, I'm John. I'm your new neighbor." It would turn out John was Johnny Lewis. And so Dan opened the door a little bit farther and he looks at him and he goes, "Hi, John, nice to meet you." And before the two men could have any sort of conversation, Johnny just abruptly turned around and walked away. Okay. And so Dan is totally puzzled by this strange interaction he's just had with Johnny Lewis. And he's watching him as he just walks back to the road, he walks back over and goes inside the villa and disappears. And so Dan kind of shrugs it off, he shuts his door, locks it, and goes back to his morning routine. About 30 minutes later, Dan is doing his own thing in his house when he hears his wife outside screaming for him to come outside. And so Dan runs out the front door, he goes into his driveway, which is between his property and the writer's villa, and he sees his wife is standing on the driveway, horrified, pointing up towards the back of their house. He looks down, and back near their back deck, Johnny Lewis, is standing on top of the guy that Dan and his wife had hired that day to paint their back deck. Johnny is just raining blows down on this guy. He's got a piece of wood, too, that he's hitting him with, and the worker is sitting there trying to shield himself. There's blood all over him, and Dan instinctively just runs over to Johnny. Johnny's not seen Dan at this point. Dan gets right up to him and he grabs him by the shoulder and he tries pulling Johnny off. He's screaming at Johnny to stop, but Johnny just seems totally unfazed. He's just destroying this worker. And so finally, after Dan yanks on Johnny hard enough, Johnny jumps up, turns around, and levels Dan square in the face. Dan falls to the ground, and when he looks up, Johnny is just standing over him, looking at him with no expression on his face. It's like he didn't know what he was going to do with Dan next. So he just stood there and stared at him. But Dan wasn't going to waste any time. He jumped up and he clocked Johnny square in the side of the head, but it had no effect on Johnny. He still just stared at Dan, completely expressionless. And so Dan grabbed a nearby lawn chair and practically broke it over the head of Johnny, but again, it had no effect on Johnny. He just stood there completely expressionless, staring at Dan. And so at this point, Dan just grabs the worker who can barely stand, and he runs back down the driveway. He grabs his wife, and they run towards the house to go inside. And the three of them manage to get inside the house. And as they're shutting the big, heavy door, Johnny comes bounding up and he gets right in front and he jams his arm in the space between the door and the wall. So
that day you would have had a broken arm, my G. I'm not playing. I would have boom. You know what I'm saying? You would have came. They would have been picking up the other piece of your arm.
And I don't mean any like harm or anything, but just with everything like he's going through mentally and whatever it is, punting him off or whatever, like the parents or whatever. I get he's grown, but I don't think that it's good for him to be there with Kathy. You know what I'm saying? Because if something was to happen, God forbid.
Well, we don't know.
Oh, okay, we don't know.
Up and he gets right in front and he jams his arm in the space between the door and the wall. So they can't close the door because it's getting stuck on his arm. And so all three of the adults inside, Dan, his wife, and the painter, are putting all of their weight on this huge wooden door onto Johnny's arm. And Johnny is just trying to grab them the whole time. And so finally, the three of them start raising the door and slamming it as hard as they can on Johnny's arm. And finally, after several hard blows to his arm, Johnny retracted his arm and they were able to shut the door and lock it. And so at this point, Dan's wife and the painter ran around the house, closing every window, locking every door. Meanwhile, Dan went to the side window that looked out towards the Writers Villa property, and he got his phone out and he called 911 as he's looking out the door looking for Johnny. And so after he tells 911 what's going on and he hangs up, Johnny suddenly just appears running down his driveway as if he's running back towards the back deck, but he stops almost right in front of Dan's window. He turns and he starts running towards the villa property. He jumps over a fence that's at least waist height, just jumps clear over it, and then he gets to this huge wooden fence that surrounded the entire villa property that was at least 8, 9, 10 feet, and he very easily just jumps, grabs the top, and catapults himself right over the top, and then disappeared inside of the villa. Within minutes, the police showed up and they went inside the villa and they could not believe what they found. Based on the evidence, this is what investigators believe happened. After Johnny, for the first time, walked up to Dan's property and awkwardly knocked on the door and said, "Hi, I'm John, I'm your new neighbor." After that, he turned around and Dan watched him as he left his property and made his way back and went inside the villa. Once Johnny got inside the villa, he made his way up to the second floor and he went into Kathy Davis's room where she was sitting. Now, Kathy most likely turned and saw Johnny standing in the doorway. He's got no shirt on, he's sweating, he looks totally crazed. She probably was not scared. Instead, her motherly instincts kicked in and she probably said, "Hey, are you okay? Can I help you? What's going on?" And as she probably stood up and made her way over to make sure he was okay, Johnny, for reasons no one understands, proceeded to beat and kick and strangle her. And then when she fell to the ground and was totally helpless, Johnny proceeded to either stomp on her skull repeatedly, or he hit her over the head repeatedly with a rusty hammer that was later found in his bedroom. But no matter how Johnny did it, he managed to severely fracture her skull, and that's what ultimately killed her. After killing Kathy, Johnny tracked down her beloved cat and killed the cat the same way. Afterwards, Johnny ran out of the villa, and that's when he spotted Dan's house painter just sitting outside, and he walked over to him and just began beating him. And just like the attack on Kathy and her cat, this attack on this house painter appeared to have no motive as well. After Dan came outside and managed to fight Johnny off, and then when Dan went back inside the house with his wife and with the painter, Johnny stood outside for a few minutes before running down Dan's driveway and then hopping over those two fences right in front of Dan, and then Johnny disappeared inside of the villa. Once Johnny was in the villa, it's believed he climbed up to the upper patio or onto the roof of the villa itself, and from there he either jumped or fell to his death on the driveway below. His death was officially ruled an accident, not a suicide. After the news broke about what had happened at the Writers Villa, everybody assumed Johnny must have been on some really hardcore drugs. That's the only explanation for why someone would act the way he acted. But when his toxicology report came back, it showed he had absolutely no drugs of any kind, legal or illegal, in his system. He was completely sober at the time he committed this horrible crime. Some believe Johnny really did have some undiagnosed head injury from that motorcycle accident, and this head injury is responsible for his violent outbursts. Others disagree and say the head injury had nothing to do with it. Johnny clearly had some undiagnosed mental disorder. Maybe it was schizophrenia, maybe he was bipolar, maybe it was something else, but it was this mental disorder that led to these violent outbursts. But to this day, no one knows for sure why Johnny did what he did. All we know is an innocent woman and her cat were needlessly killed. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode,
found it. It was somewhere like right in here. It was in the corner. But, whew,
Wow.
that was a lot. And I told you Katy wasn't gonna be in it. But I feel so bad for the old lady.
Yeah, I feel bad for Kathy.
She did not deserve that. And all honesty,
My goodness.
I feel as though if he stayed at home with his parents, I don't believe what happened would have happened.
You can't 100% say because those episodes are so like
spontaneous, random.
So spontaneous, so random. Like can't control half of the time, and then the fact that if they, if it was like a mental illness or whatever, and the medication possibly, if it was a mental illness, could have helped, he refused to take it. So, yeah, you really can't say. Honestly, it probably would have. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like with situations like that, you can't say because there was no motive for anything. Everything was super random, super spontaneous. Like this is a painter at the neighbor's house. You don't even know this man, never seen him before. That was random as hell. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: is there a possibility? And let me ask y'all as well. Is there a possibility that had hitting his head caused him to have like a possibly a multi-personality disorder where personalities were starting to take over? Remember, he started speaking in a British accent randomly. Mm-hmm. Nobody ever heard. Because my thing is, if he had always had bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, he would have already been showed some type of sign. Mm-hmm. No signs show, which we don't know how he was within his relationships. Mm-hmm. But also, we don't know how he was within like any actings. Did the acting have a lasting effect?
Take a toll or something.
Yeah.
To the point where he was like, this is just too much for me. Like mentally, I want out. Like,
but my thing is, he never showed signs of anything because that would have been reported. Mm-hmm. The only things being reported is the head trauma and a suddenly change of personality after the fact. Mm-hmm. And for him to be in such a state when he attacked everyone of nothingness or I'm not in control anymore. Yeah. Something else took control of his body, and it wasn't Johnny. Mm-hmm. Even the way he was acting, also while he was in jail, even though he was in jail or prison for 6 weeks, we don't know what happened behind those walls. I've seen people who have gone in normal, mm-hmm. what we deem as normal, and they come out a totally different person. Their life, their actions, their functionality is totally different. Jail is not meant for people. Like the idea of the jail system is not meant for mankind, mm-hmm. but people have this notion of what jail is. It's really just kept there to hold people for punishment. It's not to rehabilitate people or to further people in life. It's not. It's just we gonna house you right here because you were in punishment. Like hearing all these stories. My mom did what over 15 years working at the prison in multiple different levels. Mm-hmm. It's literally jail's literally like you going to a babysitter, mm-hmm. and you can't leave. Yeah. And they tell you what to do, what time to eat, how to move, what all this, and they reward you with, you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes and stuff, if you be on your best behavior, like y'all treat them like the kids. Yeah. But it's loosely. So we don't know if something also, because all of a sudden he spiraled even to a worse person of who he is when he was in confinement, locked up. But I do believe something happened due to the car crash. I mean, the motorcycle crash. The head trauma was a triggering point. And yeah, he had been normal and calm. Mm-hmm. No, I'm saying, yeah, he has been normal and calm when he first went to the villa. Yeah. Because he hadn't had that effect. It's not because he left the villa. It's because of what actions occurred. Even when he first moved back home. Yeah. did anything change when he first moved back home? Also, when he was with Diane, I understand the relationship didn't work, but have anyone asked Diane how was he within your relationship?
Right.
Did he show any signs of this while he was in a relationship? Even Katy Perry, even though their relationship, if she did write 2 songs about him, what I would like to know what songs there were.
Which 2 songs there were?
Because I want to understand the lyrics, because the lyrics speaks truth. If she didn't get a co-writer for it, and it's just 2 people, if she solely wrote those 2 songs, and if it was about her experience with Johnny, I wonder. I'm sure somebody knows the songs, so please comment down below. But what were the meaning behind those songs?
And I would like to just know more details as far as like if
his character, or what you mean like his character?
No, just more details about him.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you talking about just about his character overall, and if like someone has reported that they did see changes even before like the crash.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like they, seen some type of personality changes, or he started to act this way or act that way, or I just want to know if anything was ever like reported that wasn't stated, like in the video.
Because trauma brings out different things in people.
Yeah.
People respond to trauma different ways, and it's not even physical trauma, emotional trauma, mental trauma. It's all types of trauma you can deal with what makes you change who you are. But is it possibly that because the fact that if other people knew how he was, and it was like it wasn't just a motorcycle crash, then I'll be like, okay, it was an untreated disorder that he possibly had, or he just snapped one day. But he couldn't have just snapped one day if we literally see changing events, changing character ever since he had came home from having a crash. The only thing was possibly abnormal is him going west of Los Angeles.
Well, taking the ride
just
itself.
That if that wasn't something he did on a regular, all right, cool. Possibly something was there. Again, sometimes people say Mr. Ballen go into detail. He possibly didn't go into as much detail about who Johnny was as an individual, as deep as what we will need to understand to be able to say, well, yeah, that wreck was 100%. Or are people not detailing that information? Because, again, if he was showing signs before, y'all should have been got him help.
Yeah. But
you can only help someone when they're willing to help, willing to be helped. He wasn't even willing to. He would go, and it seemed like he would go do things just so y'all can possibly get off his back.
Yeah. But
even with the medication, I refused to take the medication, refusing to go see any other doctor, because it was like I'm refusing to see the truth, or are those personalities taking over, and those are the ones who saying no, because we're here to stay. You get what I'm saying? Because I do believe people do have multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
And I do believe sometimes themselves get lost, and that person you know them as is no longer there, and another personality has taken over, and that personality be wild and loose, and you just be like, what the fuck is going on?
I mean, this whole situation is like super unfortunate, like super sad, super like, you know what I'm saying? Because
at least you
it's
would
like,
why.
Yeah, just everything. Because like you're just like being yourself, you're acting. You know what I'm saying? You're like living the life that you always, I guess, wanted or whatever. And then things just like change. You know what I'm saying? Like things happen.
But could it have been his role on some? Because
that's the thing.
I haven't seen Sons of Anarchy, so I can't comment on his role. Because it's a possibility. Some people
or like how deep or how gruesome it was.
Yeah,
or what things that
and some people get too caught up in that role, and they start fucking with their mental too.
Yeah.
And so look at the previous roles he did, and look at that major role. It's completely, totally different.
Yeah.
But I don't know how he was on the show to even be able to say that could possibly.
I mean, I could go and check it out and see, but there would definitely be, if you want like a quick answer for people that have watched the show. I wonder what it does come on.
I'm sure
I can find it. Yeah,
sure
I can find it. But people that have watched the show, definitely let us know.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It could be. I honestly wish that he probably would have like been willing, you know, when he was here to go and see other doctors. You know what I'm saying? And get like a second, a third, or fourth opinion. It doesn't hurt.
To possibly get treated the right way.
Yeah, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Because the events that happened possibly wouldn't have happened.
And facts. Yeah. And rest in peace to Kathy and her cat.
Yeah.
So.
And hopefully those individuals who were attacked were able to physically heal and mentally heal from that situation, because that's very like triggering, because he could have killed all of them. So man. Hey man, make sure y'all spam us up. Y'all let us know y'all thoughts and opinions about it in the comment section down below, man. But as always, y'all know how it go. I do go with the name DJ. This is we are.
Go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my folks. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar.